Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security.
Hello, Cognitive Crucible audience. This is John Bicknell with 3 very quick notes before we start today's discussion. First of all, we had a very successful Phoenix Challenge conference a couple of weeks ago, and we will be making those recordings available for those of you who missed it or for those of you who would like to review the content. However, in order to do so, you will have to be an IPA member. There's a link in the show notes for you to go to our webpage and join either as a member or consider joining as a corporate sponsor as well, which comes with complimentary individual memberships depending on what corporate sponsorship tier you decide to join. Regardless, we hope you're getting value from these discussions and consider supporting our mission. Number 2, if you have a suggestion for a podcast guest, please let me know. And an introduction to that guest would also be helpful. We are looking for government leaders. So far, we have not had anyone on from the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of State. And as a retired Marine, I've had a number of Marines on the podcast. So I'm also looking for representation from the Navy, the Coast Guard, and the Air Force. So please send to me your suggestions for podcast guests. And finally, number 3, please consider rating the podcast and leaving a review. This helps others find the podcast and also helps our AI overlords algorithmically deliver the podcast to people who are most likely to appreciate it. And now on to today's discussion. My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Mr. Phil Chudoba, who serves as the Associate Director for Capabilities at the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, or NGA. In this capacity, he is responsible for defining the strategic direction of the agency and implementing that strategy. Before joining NGA, Phil served as the Assistant Director of Intelligence at the headquarters of the United States Marine Corps, and before that, as an active duty United States Marine, first as a Marine Infantryman and then as an intelligence officer until he retired as a colonel. Phil Chudoba, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Hey, thanks so much, John. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. So I'm looking forward to the session, and yeah, thanks again.
You bet. So I'd like to start out, Phil, by asking for your take on where we are relative to national security. You have a rich multi-decade perspective. As we just mentioned in your bio, before your senior leadership role at NGA, you were an enlisted Marine, and then you got commissioned, and then you served as a senior civilian, all in the United States Marine Corps. And part of your service included combat as well. So I would love for you to lay out how you see our national security climate currently.
Sure, thanks, John. So yeah, it's been 4 decades, a little over 4 decades since I first raised my right hand at the recruiting station in New Jersey, and you know, the journey has had a ton of twists and turns when we consider the national security environment. I was a Cold Warrior back in the day, and that would be the early to mid 1980s, and this is a great power competition period, as we all know. And I was part of that strategic approach that led to the demise of the Soviet Union, which was, it was a great thing for the U.S. and for global security. That kind of led us to this unipolar environment that all of us remember, right? We went into a major regional conflict in the Desert Storm era, proved our joint warfighting doctrine in that battle space, and the world watched. From there, we went on to a series of peacekeeping operations in the Balkans, and then some small-scale contingency operations where, having participated in some of those things, I really think our interagency approach matured and enabled information dominance in the tactical environment. And looking back on all these experiences, they really seem to validate our ability to successfully navigate that continuum of conflict with all the structural and doctrinal capabilities that we had put in place in the DoD and the IC. So, we seem to have a really good formula for dealing with a broad range of threats around the globe. But of course, during the same period, we had this specter of international terrorism emerge. Perhaps most notably and closest to my heart at the Marine barracks at Beirut Airport in 1983, along with a series of maybe seemingly disconnected incidents. But, I really think just as we were validating our warfighting doctrine and capabilities, so were these terrorist groups doing the same thing over time, maybe in different venues and perhaps with different objectives, but of course, all along proving that doctrine of terror, for lack of a better term. And then, after the turn of the millennium, we had those cataclysmic events of 9/11, which some would say propelled us into a new era of warfare, although I think most of us, that navigated that timeline would insist this had kind of been in the works for some time. It had been brewing. So, we went into Operation Iraqi Freedom, where to some extent I think we attempted to repeat a play from our Desert Storm playbook. And I think we were actually somewhat surprised when we saw many of those Iraqi conventional military forces melt away, as we described it, and join other factions to form a fairly formidable insurgency that posed years of challenges and threats to us. So, these experiences, combined with the ongoing experiences in Afghanistan, I think, introduced us to a level of complexity that required significant adaptation. Lots and lots of resilience and adaptation over 2 decades of counterinsurgency operations, whether you look at the DoD or the IC. I think that that adaptation and resilience, combined with our ability to leverage all elements of national power, I think it was incredible in my opinion. And ultimately, our very deliberate strategic decision to play an away game, right, to keep this fight overseas, I really think that was critical in keeping the threats heavily focused on venues other than our homeland. So I don't think everyone fully appreciates that strategic dimension of where we landed. But I think it's important for us to recognize that the intertwining of our military approach, how we employ the elements of national power, how we elect to engage adversaries, all is part of now a way of managing this spectrum of competition, crisis, and conflict. So now today, we're contemplating Russia and a rising China. And for me, it almost seems as if the circle's closing now, bringing us back to great power competition. Perhaps in this case, a more intensive one, given the ramifications of technology and the speed of information now in the digital age. And today, I think we're contending with a much more fluid continuum spanning that spectrum of competition, crisis, and conflict. And we've got to manage our activities and our adversaries across that very fluid spectrum if we're going to preserve our vital security interests. So geospatial intelligence, the business that we're in here at NGA, of course, is as important in this environment as it always has been. Providing our key decision makers with essential situational awareness and strategic insight, while enabling us to maintain custody of important adversary targets and hold their forces at risk. Overall, I think our experiences over the past 4 decades have equipped us intellectually, technologically, and materially to really contend successfully with the complexity of this current era, where time and space are radically compressed, and traditional perspectives on what we used to call the phases and levels of warfare, they all may be obsolete today. So this, this environment where we have this unprecedented complexity with new challenges in terms of the speed and scale of information and the associated decision making, that's different. But I think the good news is that we've had tremendous learning opportunities for a few decades, and while there's probably those out there who would contend that the U.S. often gets caught in the trap of fighting the last war, I'd say that many of the approaches that we've refined over these past 2 decades will serve us well in the future, particularly I think national tactical integration and this interagency collaboration effect. In the end, it's a bit more dangerous and challenging, but we've got to bring our best to the playing field here, just like a professional sports team, right? And we've got to take these fundamentals and practice them over and over and over in those representative environments like the combatant command and service component levels, because we want to dominate the game when we step on the field here. So long journey, lots of learning, but a really, really positive and effective evolution of how we pursue our national security objectives in this complex environment.
Yeah, thanks for that perspective, Phil. Some in our audience may be unfamiliar with the National Geospatial Agency. Could you recap what NGA's role is in great power competition, especially our ongoing struggle below the level of armed conflict? And also, could you comment as far as whether or not NGA has a role with respect to operations in the information environment?
Yeah, absolutely, John. So NGA operates a very complex system of systems in our efforts to show the way to literally get many of our customers from point A to point B on the planet here, and also to help expose options and inform decisions. We're in the business of decision maker support to a great extent. We want to be able to facilitate decisions and actions in speed with accuracy and precision. And so, in the context of decision theory, I'll often think about that Air Force colonel named John Boyd, who's probably someone you're familiar with, right?
Yeah, the old OODA loop.
Yeah, right. And what a great context to think about what this agency does, and that idea that the competitor who has more accurate information and who access that information and assess change faster, that's going to be the competitor who wins. We effectively enable that with our geospatial intelligence at NGA. We're heavily invested in partnerships, lots of critical partnerships that are defined with flexibility and limited only by imagination and willingness to cooperate and create meaningful outcomes. We think that gives us a strong comparative advantage in the space that we work. And what we do here is we operate critical national capability and we leverage commercial capability to evolve a broad range of sensors and situational awareness and targeting capability that allows us to do the things we need to do at scale and speed around the globe. Within what we call great power competition, I would say that NGA provides decision superiority to policymakers and warfighters. We deliver what we sometimes describe as exquisite geospatial intelligence with those necessary attributes of precision and speed. And that's how we get our decision makers to dominate those OODA loops that we mentioned briefly earlier. We do this across that spectrum of competition, crisis, and conflict. And, we obviously prefer to remain below the threshold of armed conflict, but certainly we will do it through the expected phases of any war that we get engaged in. But yeah, Boyd theory, I think, really is a great overarching context to to think about when we talk about what NGA provides to the nation, to policymakers and warfighters. Geospatial intelligence as kind of a decision support tool clearly enables assessment of change within Boyd's context, and NGA is the agency that provides these decision support tools with accuracy and speed. Certainly in the information environment today, where I think we'd agree we have such ubiquitous proliferation of information, and I'd say disinformation as well, right? This really affects every aspect of our national security, I think, across the range of tools we might employ, from diplomatic to informational, military, and economic. We as an agency play a vital role in providing decision makers with those insights that they really need to make well-informed decisions faster than our adversaries, and I'll emphasize that point. You know, every human activity occurs in time and space. Everything that happens has geospatial attributes and context, and we're the organization that provides this information to our nation's decision makers on a 24/7 basis with that accuracy and speed. We're the unblinking eye of the nation is really how I would describe it. When we talk about the competition and crisis activities below the level of conflict, I think in those circumstances, I think the most valuable currency is truth. And I think this is again the case across any of the tools we might seek to employ. So our capabilities, our GEOINT, in most cases, I think delivers the most objective perspective you can get as a decision maker on any given issue. You know, GEOINT delivers truth to the decision makers, whether via our sensors or our analysts, and we do it at speed and scale. And I think this is really the differentiating capability that NGA contributes to our national security.
Is NGA part of the Department of Defense, or is it part of the intelligence community, or is it a kind of a tweener organization? How would you nest it like that?
Yeah, it's a great question, John, and it's kind of a tweener. We talk about this all the time. We've got one foot squarely in both of those environments. We are an IC agency, and we also are a Title X DoD agency, specifically a combat support agency. So we're responsive to both policymakers on the IC side and warfighters on the DoD side. I often say we kind of have this organizational duality, which works well for us in terms of serving our customer base, bringing resources to bear against some of these problems. And you asked about the information space. I think NGA is relevant as ever in that operating space, whether we're providing attribution for adversary activities that might occur in that space, whether we're corroborating or refuting adversary information, combating disinformation, or supporting public diplomacy or things like that. Our world-class geospatial intelligence remains a tool of choice for decision makers and warfighters when they contend with these challenges. So, but yeah, we're both, and we feel that every day. Our demand signals come to this agency, both from the IC and from the DoD for product and services, and we're responsive to both.
That's interesting. It also must complicate things a little bit as you try to negotiate or navigate between, I guess, Title X and Title 50 authorities occasionally.
For sure it does. Those authorities are not as distinct sometimes as you might guess they would be when it comes to information, right? Because information is fungible across those boundaries.
Yeah. Onto your role as the Associate Director for Capabilities. You must be familiar with the Section 809 panel project, which was created out of the FY16 NDAA. Could you explain your role at NGA and describe how you are responding to some of our defense acquisition challenges and streamlining and improving these processes?
Yeah, I sure can, John. Thanks. So I definitely familiar with the Section 809 panel back in 2016 and participated in a little bit of that in my last position over at the Pentagon. Here at NGA, in addition to being the Associate Director for Capabilities, I also wear the Component Acquisition Executive, or CAE, hat. So I am the Senior Acquisition Official here. And as you might guess, I think about acquisition and I think about improving our acquisition processes every day. So I'm a certified acquisition professional and fairly well-schooled in the DAU ways, the Defense Acquisition University ways, most of which are the DoD ways, and I'll emphasize that. And this kind of comes back to what we were talking about just a minute ago. You know, here at NGA, we have this organizational duality existing as an IC agency and as a CSA. So as you might expect, some of the acquisition practices here sometimes follow a hybrid approach, especially since we're accountable to acquisition oversight in both lanes, right? In the IC lane, it's OD&I that provides acquisition oversight, and on the DoD side, it's the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. So there is, in fact, some complexity there, as you suggested. But my bottom line is this: in every acquisition effort here at NGA, we're looking aggressively to employ best practices for accelerating the delivery of the capabilities that the agency and our enterprise needs. And for me, many times that means being brilliant in the basics. You know, ensuring we have properly trained and certified people who are managing our programs so that we're driving our cost, schedule, and performance parameters aggressively towards the best possible outcomes. It means examining and implementing innovative methods for developing and delivering our most critical capabilities, many of which are software-based. And on that point, I'll emphasize that here we're using the Adaptive Acquisition Framework, or the AAF, as a model for revamping our software-based acquisition efforts. This is something that a recent version of the DoD 5000 manual invoked in a very meaningful way under the last USD A&S, and this gives us, you know, the authorities we need to really follow best practices for agile development and minimize cost, truncate schedule, while maximizing that performance that we want for our missions and our users. So here at NGA, we call this the NGA software way, and it is working internally, and it's working really well with our partners in industry. At the same time that we're doing some of these aggressive things, we're also looking to provide right-sized oversight to our programs and seeking those opportunities to drive decision-making down to the lowest levels in our programs so that we can better keep pace with technology. You know, we want to go fast where we can. And we're adapting our contracting strategies to do the same, maximizing the use of commercial solutions where they might exist and are relevant to our needs. And you know, the whole goal there is to avoid the need for us to develop any unique solutions if we have ready-made solutions out there. Innovation is a big theme here, and we leverage innovation every day across mission. We align innovation to our most critical needs. That's a super powerful risk reduction opportunity in some of our major programs, but it also allows us to do what I call harness technological opportunities at those times when we're exposed to disruptive technologies that, you know, often emerge from small business or Silicon Valley startups or places like that. I call this particular part of innovation the iPhone syndrome. Right? You're probably like me, John, right? You probably didn't know you needed an iPhone until Steve Jobs showed it to you back there in 2007 or whenever he did that. And that, right? And once he showed it to you, you knew for sure you had to have one. You needed one. And that's kind of what I mean by harnessing technological opportunity. I'll say we want to do all of our business and all of these things as good stewards of the resources that the nation gives us, because we want to be known for delivering results that drive mission success, frankly. Our business is incredibly important to the DoD and the IC, and I will tell you, I'm super proud of our acquisition workforce here at NGA and very excited about where we're headed. This is important for our GEOINT enterprise. We've got partners depending upon us for these mission outcomes. The nation's depending upon us, and we've really got the right team working on the hard problems. I'm confident that they're delivering capability sets that are going to preserve our advantage in the decades to come across that spectrum we've been talking about.
Yeah, well, thanks. Well, speaking of preserving our advantage, what do you see as your greatest challenges in the protection of NGA's emerging technologies and capabilities? And what efforts are you implementing to protect these capabilities in order to maintain U.S. competitive advantage?
Yeah, holy cow, that's a great question, and there's a lot going on there. We can never cease to innovate and maintain our advantage over our adversaries. This is a race, much like the space race metaphor implies. And to truly benefit from these advanced technologies, we've got to improve our ability to execute things like large-scale compute projects, whether they're cloud, on-premise, or hybrid in nature. We got to aggressively pursue artificial intelligence. AI is part of our future here. When you consider the speed and the scale of any future conflict with an adversary like China. So, we're looking to develop and enhance our ability to discover, build, and share analytic outputs. We want to move to an environment where we're constantly operating and streaming analytics as our norm. We want well-equipped data scientists and monitors working to customize, some of our models that we use for machine assisted analytics. We want to leverage an upskilled workforce to really diversify those data and analytic pipelines that we're working. And then, the wrapper for all of this is promoting the ethical and transparent use of AI in explainable IA frameworks. Let's kind of have to do that. I think there's this whole range of really complex things we need to do, right? And all of these efforts are fraught with technical challenge. They require intensive experimentation with key partners. And here's kind of the rub. If we don't protect our efforts while we're successfully delivering things like AI, then I think ultimately we'll fail. So the good news here is we understand the inextricable relationship of security to these advanced capabilities, and we're working hard to establish and sustain the proper security environment to ensure our success. And I think, you asked about threats to the efforts. I think those threats are going to emanate from the same adversaries that seek to confront us in the physical domain. A couple of these adversaries are near peer. A couple of them are a bit more rogue. But I all think they have similar objectives, and that is to disrupt and diminish our advantage here at home and abroad. I think they're prepared to do this via physical and logical means. And I think our technology efforts are squarely in their sights. I think they want to do things like steal intellectual property that would be beneficial for their use. I think they want to corrupt our digital supply chains. I think they want to attack our networks and data. I think all of these are part of the new reality in this technology and digital space. And I worry about all of these things because, again, our best research and development efforts can be really effectively derailed if we don't account for security at all levels. And so at NGA, I've got responsibility for some of these things, and we're actively implementing an agency-level supply chain risk management effort, or SCRIM, as it's called, to really screen, establish, and maintain the integrity of the data that comes into the agency from various sources, many of which are now industry sources, frankly. Our primary supply chain at NGA is data, so this has got to be a priority. Securing our data is foundational to everything else that follows. When we talk about this whole of nation effort, we're examining every option out there to leverage our IC and DoD partnerships so that we've got a layered security environment around our technology, especially our critical program information, or CPI as it's called, to prevent any disclosure or loss of technology to adversaries and just to frankly blunt any of their efforts to stealing our advantages. So we're seeking a variety of partnerships across government and across industry to make best use of these technologies, policies, and procedures for getting to this enhanced security environment. I don't think there's a need for extensive discovery learning here. We've got numerous best practices out there And our goal is to adapt and adopt them for our own use. So that's that whole of government flavor that that I've mentioned previously in other forums. We really think it's the right way to tackle these challenges that that we're facing. Hey, I'll tell you, you know, part of me feels like the greatest challenge here is simply going to be keeping up. Much like you and I are always updating the virus protection software in our home systems, right, and the firewalls on our home networks, you know, I think we're going to have the same challenges here. These adversaries are going to be relentless, and they have large groups of capable folks who are explicitly missioned to steal or damage our technology. So we got to constantly understand, evaluate, and respond. When I think about this particular part of our business, you know, it reminds me of a quote from Lewis Carroll, you know, the Through the Looking Glass novel, right? And the quote goes like this: now, here you see it takes all the running you can do just to keep in one place. And if you want to get somewhere else, you got to run at least twice as fast. And I think that's really appropriate when we think about security. You got to be agile and aggressive, probably as agile and aggressive as the banking and finance industries are, if you want to stay ahead of the bad guys here. So that's kind of where my head is on these things.
Yeah, totally on that last point there, Phil. And I would recommend to our audience to go back and listen to a podcast we did a few weeks back with a gentleman named Shomit Ghosh, and he talked about that very phenomenon, Phil, the Red Queen hypothesis of, you know, in order to keep up, you have to keep on running faster and faster and faster. And it also harkens back to the OODA loop as well, and being able to speed the OODA loop. And we can expect that the OODA looping has to be done faster and faster just in order to maintain, let alone get ahead today. NGA has very publicly put out there that this concept of a Moonshot program. Could you talk a little bit about NGA's Moonshot?
I sure can. In fact, I'd welcome that opportunity. It's you know, it's a very useful and valid metaphor that Admiral Sharp crafted shortly after he arrived here, and it really resonates with me. The idea here is that, you know, much like in the Kennedy space race era, we today are engaged in a pivotal competition that has some grave consequences here, and it's a competition we must and will win. We intend to dominate. And so the Moonshot, as part of the director's intent, really exists as a call to action for NGA, for people inside the agency, as well as our many partners outside. And I mentioned earlier, the GEOINT team is larger than just our agency. Our strength is really in our people and our partnerships. So if you read through the director's intent and take a good look at the language in there, you'll see that we're relentlessly pursuing this whole of enterprise approach. We're looking at all of our efforts and decisions through the lens of partnership, and we're not going to do any of this as a single standalone agency. So all the good partners we have across industry and academia, I think, are now you know, understanding and keeping in mind this Moonshot philosophy here. So the Moonshot and the mission imperatives are all aligned to the national security strategy, the national defense strategy, the national intelligence strategy, that nesting that you would expect from a good, solid plan. It's all there. And at our level, at the agency level, the director's intent and the strategy go hand in hand. The strategy, if you take a look at it, it's got 4 goals that align to people, partners, and then what we call mission today and mission tomorrow. These are the 4 pillars that we really refer back to in everything we do, and they provide the foundation for accomplishing what we call the Moonshot. On the topic of the Moonshot, for me, that's got a very distinct and practical focus at its core. And if you ask folks in my organization, in ADC as we call it, if you ask them how I interpret the Moonshot, I think they'll tell you that I emphasize our pressing need to solve that sensor to shooter challenge. For me, this is very much about placing that maximum focus on the very demanding requirement that we have to radically reduce what we call the TC-PED cycles. TC-PED is tasking, collection, processing, exploitation, and dissemination. This is the cycle by which NGA creates geospatial intelligence. And we've got to reduce these cycles from many, many minutes to just a few minutes. And this is where the connection with Boyd theory comes in, right? It's especially crucial in the face of the range of new capabilities we're seeing our adversaries develop. I think really this is probably the most substantive challenge we're going to face in retaining that decision advantage that we want. If we're going to solve this sensor-to-shooter thing, I think that's the most difficult part of our challenge, and being successful there will benefit all of our customers from the accuracy and the speed we deliver. So, for me, it's a game-changing challenge. That's why the space race thing it resonates so well with me.
Right. So the Moonshot harkens back to President Kennedy in the early 60s, basically saying by the end of this decade, we're going to put a man on the moon, right? And so NGA is riffing off of that, but there is no discrete challenge in state, right? It's more of like a mindset. Would you say that that's fair?
I would say it's both, John. I think the discrete end state probably, if you were to speak to some of my peers here in the agency, they would give you a different perspective based upon the various roles and responsibilities they have, but the aggregate effect of continuing to provide that decision advantage to policymakers and warfighters is the end state. So if you were to try to decompose that end state, you would come up with discrete effects like accomplishing sensor-to-shooter in single-digit minutes. It's both a philosophy and I think a set of meaningful end states, if you were to ask me. And the Kennedy narrative is something we talk about quite a bit here. It's not just the one we're most familiar with is the speech where the president says we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. Here's the part that I focus on, and this is not the more celebrated part of it. The president also said that this goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because this is a challenge we're willing to accept and we're unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win. For me, this kind of resonates sort of in a Simon Sinek way, right? Unity of purpose. Mm-hmm. Unity of effort, and a winning team. This is that for me, that meaningful equation of focus and relentless execution that really gets you results. So if you don't have that stuff, then you don't get your results in a challenge like this. So, yeah, I would say philosophical and fairly specific for those of us who have roles and responsibilities within the agency.
One last item on this. I recently attended an NGA Industry Day, and one of the things that you guys spent a good bit of time talking about is a facility modernization in St. Louis, which is in support of all this. Could you talk about that facility project just briefly?
Yeah, I sure can. You may be aware that while NGA headquarters is here in Springfield, Virginia, the facility that we call NGA Campus East, or NCE, we've also presently have a footprint in the St. Louis area that's called NCW, or NGA Campus West. A lot of intensive GEOINT activities go on out there. In fact, if we had more time, I would tell you about a heroic story regarding NCW. When I was a battalion commander in the battle space, the team out there delivered. They kept the lights on for me as a Marine Intel Battalion commander and provided us with critical GEOINT support at the Marine Corps' time of need. But that footprint out there is incredibly important to us in terms of the support that they deliver. We are in the process of establishing a new facility out there that we're calling N2W. get N2W, NGA Next Campus West, if I'm saying that right. I might not be getting it exactly right. But the replacement for our NCW footprint is actually under construction now. There is a tremendous technology and academic ecosystem out there. So for me and for the objectives that I have as the capabilities guy here, I see tremendous promise in us, manning that facility and driving towards some of the outcomes we've discussed here today. And the partnerships are rich out there across industry and academia. I'm just very, very excited to see the campus begin to take shape through the construction phases here, and looking forward to, I believe the timeline is 2025 or so when we expect to populate the facility.
Very good. Could we wrap up, Phil? Could you recommend a book or other online resource that our audience may not be aware of, but which also maybe touches upon some of these themes that we've been discussing? Or it could be something altogether different, but what is on your nightstand these days?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I'll actually give you more than one thing, if that's okay.
You bet. Yeah.
I think, so there's a book out there that I'm referring a lot of people to. It's called China's Vision of Victory by Jonathan Ward. I think it's a really good examination of strategic intent from an adversary perspective. I think it also kind of illuminates how pernicious this threat is, and so really well written. I think really a good objective perspective from a China expert on what we're contending with here. Another book I would highly recommend is called Human Plus Machine. This was written by Paul Dougherty and James Wilson. As we kind of wade into the AI ML environment and start to pursue some of these machine-driven solutions, I think understanding the evolving nexus between traditional human-driven analytic processes and what machines may and frankly may not do for us in the future, I think that's an important reference point. And then I visit the South China Morning Post online every now and then. So I think that's a good one to keep tabs on, www.scmp.com, for folks who are interested in our, in our peer competitor. As with any news outlet, you want to make sure you understand, any biases they may bring in their writing, but it's current, and it's probably the best lens, the best available lens that you have into day-to-day activities in that particular region. But yeah, those are what I would recommend, and I'm always looking for for more thematics that inform where we're trying to go here as an agency.
Right. Well, thank you very much for all that. We will have links to those books and the other items that we discussed throughout the conversation here in the show notes. And with that, Mr. Phil Chudoba, thank you so much for being on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you, John.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.